to Gordon Bell, who works for Microsoft in their supercomputing area. But he's a good sport about it. Here is a supercomputer that was made in Oak Ridge National Laboratories. You can see you don't need very expensive PCs to do this. This is 48 PCs lined up with the keyboards on top. There's one that's fallen over. And a highly sophisticated networking on the back. This is actually used to do real supercomputing work. And you can make these in your high schools. If you have a computer lab in your high school with your computers hooked together with Ethernet, all you have to do is put the right software on them, and you too can have a supercomputer to allow your students to learn how to program this. Why is this important? Because we are now moving into the area of distributed applications over the network and multi-core systems, 7-core systems, 8-core systems. You need to learn how to divide up your data and your code. Now about this time, Linus Torvalds had graduated. It took him a little longer than most because he was busy doing things other than school. And he decided to move to Transmeta in Silicon Valley. And I was lucky enough to have known them for a time. I am the godfather of Patricia. That's Patricia there. That's Patricia. That's Tuve, Linus' wife. I'm the godfather of Patricia and Daniela, which is their second child. So I went out to Silicon Valley to show them around. And then slightly after that, the digital office in Helsinki, Finland, wanted to have a Linux day. But unfortunately, Linus was now in the United States. So they invited me to go over to Helsinki, Finland, to talk to their customers about Alpha Linux. Now, this is the start of my traveling, talking about Linux. And I've been traveling around doing this for the last 15 years, going around telling people how to make money with free software or save money with free software. How to have control of your software. Because if you don't use free software, then you are a software slave. And there's somebody who tells you when to upgrade your system, when to, what to run your system on, what to run your software on, how many people can use your software. They tell you when you have to migrate off of that because they're no longer supporting it. That is like being a slave. Because when you're a slave, you're told where to go, what to do, who to marry, when to have children. So, if you don't want to be a software slave, you have to use free software. So I went over to Helsinki to talk about this, and of course we had the normal sauna fiesta that happens in Finland. After that, I went to Fiji, kind of from the cold north to the south. And in Fiji, I happened to visit the University of the South Pacific. Now, at that time, the university was connected to the internet by one 1200 bit per second modem. So they had heard of Linux, but every time they tried to pull the kernel down, they would get halfway through, there'd be some storm in the South Pacific, the net would drop, and they'd have to start all over again. So I had a copy of a Linux distribution, it happened to be based on Red Hat, and I gave it to them. And as I was giving it to them, I had this thought. I've been a product manager of operating systems at that point for 10 years. I knew how much intellectual property was in that CD, and I was giving it to them for free. $2 billion at least was the worth of the intellectual property in that CD. And so as I gave it to the university, I felt a little bit like this. That's me. Now, in September of 1998, we started to have database companies like Oracle and Sybase and Formix start to port because their customers were demanding it. And in October of 1998, companies like IBM started to recognize that Linux was a good operating system and free software was good for their business. Now, why would a company like IBM think like this? Well, in 1998, IBM did a very strategic thing. They sold off their notebook division, their ThinkPads, and their desktop division, which did desktop workstations, to Lenovo, a Chinese company. IBM sold that because even though they were making a profit on that, the profit was very small. And IBM could not survive on a small profit. They took that money and reinvested it by buying a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers. PricewaterhouseCoopers was a services company. And IBM doubled the size of their service department. Why? Because services have a high profit margin. Companies pay a lot of money for a good solution. And IBM was going to deliver that solution. Now, when you're trying to deliver a solution with closed source software, you have two problems. The first problem is you have to pay a certain percentage of the money for the royalties of the software you're using. But the other problem is you can't change the software you've bought. And therefore, it's difficult to get the different packages of software to work together the way the customer wants it. With free software, not only did you not have to pay the royalty, so you can redivert that money to either greater profits or lower the cost of the solution. And you can give a better value to the customer by making the software work together better. The customer will pay more for that. And IBM recognized this. IBM doesn't like free software because they like to sit around a campfire singing Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my lord, free software. You know, or the free software song that Richard Stallman sings. They don't do that. They're about money and profit and giving solutions to customers. And that's what they recognize, and that's why they support free software. Now in the year 2000, embedded system companies started to use free software. Before this, embedded system companies would develop their own operating system. And they would also oftentimes have to create their own compilers. As they went from one chip to another, they had to create the compilers first, then the operating system. And this was very difficult. Now, in the year 2000, there was this other thing that started to happen. The internet started to connect these embedded systems. People started thinking about what would happen if my refrigerator could talk to my microwave. You know, I had this conversation, I interrupted this conversation in my own kitchen the other day. I went downstairs, my microwave said, "Refrigerator, what do you have to put in me?" Refrigerator said, "I've got this loaf of bread." Microwave said, "No, I've seen that loaf of bread, it's moldy. You're not putting that in me." You know, but seriously, these devices are starting to talk to each other. In the United States, they have washing machines that you can look at over the internet to find out if your laundry is done or not. And the network stacks are very hard to do. So all of a sudden, embedded systems people said, wait a minute, we have Linux now. It already runs on all these different processors. It already has a great networking stack. And we don't have to pay a royalty for it. And it's secure. And it's stable. And it's multitasking. All the things that we need. And we don't have to pay a royalty on it. So almost overnight, Linux became the most used operating system in new embedded system designs. In March 2000, a lot of the dot-coms failed. But a lot of the Linux companies, like Red Hat, went even faster. Why? Because as people were trying to recover from this dot-com failure, they started to look at the real costs and the real savings, and they realized that free software would actually benefit them. And finally, in winter of 2003, Red Hat became profitable. And other free software companies started to become profitable. So the people that say you can't make money with free software are either lying or just ignorant. Now, there's been a lot of Spanish distributions, both done in Spain and in Mexico. So, this is another advantage of free software. That free software, if you really want it to be in your language, you can go in and make the business decision about translating the strings to have it work in your language. We've had people in Mexico who have been really, really good and really, really great in the free software community. Miguel de Icaza from Mexico City, Federico, who's right over there, also from Mexico City, working on GNOME and other projects. And there's been many, many other people from Mexico and Latin America who have been very, very good in the free software space. Coming of age. Now, we've been talking about free software to this point, but in reality, there's also free culture. This lawyer, Lawrence Lessig of Stanford University, said, what would happen if we take the concept of collaboration that we see in free software and allow a licensing technique to allow this collaboration to happen in the arts, digital photography, writing, textual writing, things like that. What would happen? Music. And so he created Creative Commons, the way of freely licensing out your artistic work so that other people can build on it. And people started to develop business models around using Creative Commons and free licensing of their artistic talents. After that, open hardware. The OpenMoco phone, the Arduino. The Arduino is a little computer system. It's open hardware and open software. And people are starting to learn how to change this to meet their needs. So today, Linux runs on 98% of the top 500 supercomputers. Of the top 500 supercomputers, only one runs Windows, and they're paid to do it. It runs on 1/2 of all the server systems being shipped today. Now, a lot of server systems are mainframes, like IBM's MVS system, or Hewlett-Packard's HPUX, or other ones. So Windows NT and Windows systems run on about 1/3 of the server systems. And Linux is outselling Apple on the desktop. Now, Apple still has a larger installed base on the desktop, but today, if one Apple system on the desktop sells, there's more than one Linux system that's installed. So we're gaining market share. And in Android is outselling iOS on handsets. Now I want to point out something to you. Apple and Microsoft started at about the same time. But Apple had the strategy of creating everything themselves. And if you wanted to sell something Apple, you had to be Apple. And after all these years, they have 9% of the desktop space. Microsoft took the philosophy of supporting everybody's thing. If you had a disk drive, you write a device driver for it, they'd support it. And that means that all of these people want to advertise Microsoft. That's why you see all these little Microsoft inside or supported by Microsoft signs when everybody's advertising. And Microsoft owns 90% of the marketplace. The same thing is happening with the iPhones. They had a head start. But with Android saying, we'll go on anybody's handset, and Android is now outpacing. Why is this important? Because of applications. Application vendors will tell you, I can't port my application to your platform because your interfaces are bad, because I don't have the compiler I need, because the debugger I'm used to is not running there. And then you say to them, well, last week we shipped 120 million units. Oh, I was just kidding. We actually have our application running on your platform in the back room. We can stick it through quality assurance tonight. We'll be shipping tomorrow. Volume is everything. It's not just something, it's everything. So now we come to the future. Notice my little penguin has a tie. That's because Linux is a commercial place in the marketplace. Year 2015, Nokia, who decided to use Microsoft on their phones, has given up, and they're going to be using Android. Project Kawa, a project I'm working on to create jobs and to make computers easier to use. I'll be talking about Project Kawa on Friday at 1 o'clock on the main stage. Please come. By the year 2015, we will have 1 million free software systems administrators who are their own boss, who have their own business, and will be helping people use free software. Each one of those will be supporting about 300 clients. So 300 million thin clients will be using free software in Brazil alone, with 200 million more thin clients throughout the rest of Latin America. And while we're advanced to using GNU Linux at home, he says he's been using it for years, we just don't want to tell anybody. Year 2020, the newest GNU Linux supercomputer uses 1 trillion processors. And they realized that if they had to use Microsoft on that, it would cost about $35 trillion more just for the operating system. That's almost enough to fund a small war in Iraq. And Linus is really now glad he's gotten rid of the big kernel lock because it would have been really bad. And Steve Jobs says that OS X wasn't used because they were holding their supercomputer wrong. Year 2030, software patents are abolished around the world, especially in the United States, and they say, hey, it was really stupid. The Microsoft-Apple wars end because both companies go out of business and free software has triumphed. And finally, Linus Torvalds decides to retire because it has been fun, it is still fun, but he wants to have more time to do scuba diving. He passes his position to a Spanish-speaking protege, probably from Mexico, and Linus will still act as an advisor. He goes on to join Maddog at the place. What is the place? It is the year 2031, Maddog's mansion and marina of math, music, movies, microcomputing, microbrewery, micro-winery, micro-distillery, and big shop. It'll be in a very nice place where the students can go barefoot year-round, and we're going to have them matriculate at different universities around the world over the internet, sharing ideas at night, and sampling beer. And finally, in the year 2060, free culture brings about world peace.